Hi, this is our AT2 presentation by Sophie, Erin, Emily, and Brianna.
Our overview. So we're teaching a class of 25 grade 5, 6 students, and we're teaching them volleyball with a specific focus on the skill of serving. They already have previous knowledge on digging, spiking, and setting from other classes. We're also going to look at Fitz and Posner's phases of learning, the lesson structure, teaching the skill, inclusive strategies in the stages of learning and the safety, cognitive, associative, and autonomous stages of learning, scaffolding the practices, the game sense approach, and links to Fitz and Posner's theory.
Fitz and Posner's model explains skill development through three stages: cognitive, associative, and autonomous. In the cognitive stage, the student is basically figuring out what they need to do. It takes a lot of concentration, and mistakes are common, and they rely quite heavily on demonstrations and teacher feedback. As they move into the associative stage, the movement becomes more consistent. They are making fewer mistakes, and they are also starting to recognize and correct some of their own errors. Finally, in the autonomous stage, the skill becomes much more automatic, so the student doesn't have to consciously think about every part of the movement. This means they can start focusing more on things like tactics and decision making. It's also important to remember that students won't necessarily progress through the stages at the same rate.
So, the lesson structure for teaching the skill starts with a warm up, activating muscles needed for serving, including warming the shoulders and legs. Then the teacher will go through a demonstration, explicitly teaching exactly how to serve an underarm. The students will practice with a split stance with their non-dominant foot forward and moving with their dominant hand like a rock and pop motion. Once that's mastered, they'll move on to how to make contact with the ball with their fist in their dominant hand. A misconception here might be with an AFL handball that the fist contacts this part when in fact it's the heel of their fist. So explicitly teaching that. Then the students will work in pairs, serving over the net into the court area just to get a feel. Then they'll play a modified game called Dead Fish, where they line up and are practicing serving over the net into the court. If it doesn't go over the net, goes out of court, or is caught out, then they're out. And to be out, you go sit down on the opposite side of the net, just like in that image. And to get back in, they just need to catch the ball. Then to finish up the lesson, asking the students what are the key steps in serving in volleyball, just to reiterate what was spoken about in the explicit teaching.
When beginning teaching the skill, we need to think about the cognitive stage. Cognitive stage is when the learner needs lots of attention and feedback. Teacher's role at this stage is to demonstrate correct technique and break the serve into small, memorable steps. For example, stance, step, hold the ball, swing your arm, make contact, and follow through. The teacher should then be providing frequent feedback to students around their technique. Moving on to the associative stage, this is when the learner now understands the basic technique, makes fewer mistakes, and is becoming more consistent. At this stage, the teacher can use target-based activities, gradually increase distance, and give specific feedback. The learner can also reflect on their own performance and identify mistakes. Finally, the autonomous stage is when the serve becomes automatic. The player needs very little thought about technique and can perform it consistently and accurately. Teachers should then implement modified games and gameplay, reduce direct instruction, and challenge the player to adapt their serve to different situations. However, progression is different for all students. Regression or stagnation can occur, so the teacher may need to adjust the difficulty and provide extra support.
Inclusive practices during the different stages of learning. In the cognitive stage, we would lower the net and bring the serve lining closer so that students could serve over it, have an inflatable beach ball so students can focus on hitting the ball and building the skill before using a proper volleyball, have planned pairing of students' abilities, someone in the autonomous stage or associative with a cognitive. To improve accuracy and target the serving skill, we would install a volleyball net tape, which is pictured above. Associative, we'll play with proper volleyball, modifying the balls for students who need it, individualized feedback for error correction, and block practice for students to refine the skill. Autonomous is more game-based practice, and error correction and detection is still needed at this stage. Safety. So, safety precautions are for all students in each stage of learning, and this is part of inclusive practices. We would have an adequate warm up, both dynamic stretches and sport specific stretches, teaching students the importance of communication to reduce injuries like head clashes, protective equipment such as knee pads, padded poles so students don't run into the pole, sweeping the floors, and if having a sanded court, making sure there's no dust, dirt, debris on the court to reduce injuries.
If we applied these stages specifically to our volleyball lesson, we can see how our teaching would change as the students improve. In the cognitive stage, we would first demonstrate the underarm serve and break it into simple steps. Students could begin closer to the net, and at this point would focus mainly on getting the technique right. As students move into the associative stage, we'd gradually increase the serving distance and introduce target zones. Feedback would become more specific, and we'd encourage students to start recognizing where they went wrong in their own serve. Once a student reaches the autonomous stage, we'd put them into modified games. Instead of thinking about every part of their technique, they can start making tactical decisions like where they want to place the ball. As you can see, as along the bottom, our teacher support gradually decreases as the students become more independent.
Grade 5-6 students can be at varying stages of their development and coordination, with some students finding the underhand serve relatively easy, whereas others may not. For example, students may release the ball too early, forget to step towards the target, or throw the ball up in the air accidentally. Using Fitz and Posner, we can break the skill down into steps, use it explicit teaching and verbal cues, but also recognizing that reteaching it is also relevant if the student is not improving, they are continually making mistakes. So this constructive feedback can be helpful, especially in a way that they understand. Introducing activities such as target zones to improve this accuracy, and encouraging students to intrinsically recognize where they're making the mistake and being able to correct their own errors. This extrinsic intrinsic feedback is an important skill to learn and is also going to resolve a lot of problems in the class.
Game sense has several implications for teaching practice when teaching the underhand volleyball serve. The Australian Sports Commission states that game sense is learner-centred and uses game situations to develop decision-making and problem-solving. This is also supported by Richard Light in Game Sense Pedagogy for Performance, Participation and Enjoyment, which highlights the importance of learning through game contexts and developing players' decision-making. Therefore, instead of relying on repetitive serving drills, we would use modified games that require students to decide where, when, and why to serve. We would also use questioning, such as where could you serve to make it difficult for your opponent, allowing students to explore solutions. Finally, Fitz and Posner suggests that beginners in the cognitive stage require greater guidance. As they progress towards the associative stage, we can reduce our instruction and increase game complexity. Therefore, Game Sense shifts our role from instructor to facilitator, supporting both technical development and tactical decision-making.
Finally, when we link our lesson back to Fitz and Posner, we can see that the model has influenced the way we have structured our teaching. We've moved from simple technique-based practice towards accuracy and eventually gameplay, while gradually reducing the amount of teacher support. One strength of the model is that it gives PE teachers a clear framework for recognizing where a learner is at and adjusting practice and feedback to suit them. But there are also limitations. Learning isn't always a straight line, and students won't all progress at the same rate. A student might perform really well during practice, but then struggle when they are put into a game or under more pressure. So rather than just labeling the student as cognitive, associative, or autonomous, we'd continually observe their performance and adjust things like feedback, serving, distance, or task difficulty when needed. This allows Fitz and Posner's model to guide our teaching without assuming that every student learns in exactly the same way.
References.